In this lesson, we're going to be talking about how to solve other types of equations. So up to this point, we talked about solving linear equations, solving quadratic equations, but that's not the only equations that we have. So here we're going to solve an equation by factoring, continuing what we did when we were solving by factoring with quadratics. So our first step is that we need to get the equation equal to 0 on one side. And usually when we move over our variables or our terms, we like to put our variables in decreasing order in terms of the exponents. So I'm going to move the 18y squared over and the 4y. So that way we would have 9y to the third minus 18y squared minus 4y plus 8 equals 0. It'll just make it easier once we get to our next step, which is factoring. So our next step is to factor completely using whatever method is appropriate. Here, since we have 4 terms, it would make the most sense to use factor by grouping. So if I have 9y to the third minus 18y squared minus 4y plus 8 equals 0, we would group 2 terms at a time together, and we do our greatest common factor. So 9y to the third minus 18y squared, our GCF would be 9y squared, which means that we are left with y minus 2. In our second grouping, we would have a minus 4y in there, plus 8. Our GCF of 4 and 8 would be 4. Since our first term is negative, we're actually going to take out a negative 4. And as we talked about previously, when we take out a negative, it's going to end up changing your signs inside. So negative 4y becomes y, plus 8 will become minus 2 after we take out the minus 4 equal to 0. So we need to factor this by grouping. So that means I have another greatest common factor of y minus 2. So I'm going to take out the y minus 2. Which means that we're just left with the terms 9y squared minus 4 equals 0. So our last step is to solve for y. Now at this point we actually have 2 options, and I'll show both of them. The first option would be, if we can, we would want to continue to factor in order to solve. So we'll do that right now. So option number 1 is to continue to factor and then solve for, in this case, y. So we would have y minus 2, I cannot factor anymore. But 9y squared minus 4, that's difference of 2 squares. So 9y squared would be 3y and 3y. And then the minus 4 would become plus 2 and minus 2 in either order, equals 0. So this way we have 3 separate factors that we can now set each part equal to 0 using your 0 property and solve for y. So I would have y minus 2 equals 0, 3y plus 2 equals 0, and then 3y minus 2 equals 0. So for y minus 2, solving that, we would just be left with y equals 2. That would be our first solution. For 3y plus 2, moving the 2 over, we would have 3y equals negative 2. So y equals negative 2/3. And then for 3y minus 2, we would have 3y equals 2. So y equals 2/3. We have 3 answers, 3 solutions: y equals 2, y equals negative 2/3, and y equals 2/3. Option number 2 with solving for our variable y in this case would be to use our 0 property right away in order to solve for y. Now this method will always work versus option 1, where if we couldn't factor it, we wouldn't be able to use that method. Here, this method will always work. So some people just like to use this method no matter what rather than trying to factor again. But just know it is in your best interest to try to see if you can factor to make it easier on yourself. But if not, or if you can't figure out how to factor, we can just automatically from here use our 0 property of multiplication to solve, which means we would set each factor equal to 0. So I would have y minus 2 equals 0, and then I would have 9y squared minus 4 equals 0. So again, that y minus 2 equals 0 is just going to become y equals 2. But the 9y squared minus 4 equals 0, we're just going to be using that square root property that we learned. So moving the 4 over, we would have 9y squared equals 4. Moving the 9 over, we would have y squared equals 4/9. Then from here, we would need to take the square root of both sides. Remember, the square root of y squared would be the absolute value of y, equals the square root of 4/9. Well, that means that y is equal to plus or minus, and we want to simplify that, so the square root of 4 would be 2, square root of 9 would be 3. So although it looks a little bit different, we do get 3 answers again, 3 solutions. We get y equals 2, y equals 2/3, and y equals negative 2/3. So in that solution set notation, we would have 2, negative 2/3, and 2/3. And that's how we would solve an equation by factoring.